I'm ChosenArchitect, and this is all the mods 9 to the sky. Now, a few episodes ago, I mentioned to you that Draconic Evolution was added to the pack. And over the last few episodes, I have mentioned putting a giant Draconic sphere in the center of the base to, well, start to store power. And now today is the day that we go and start working on that. But, of course, there's always a but. We have to do a few things before we can, well, fully get started with Draconic Evolution. Well, one is technically my personal preference. I'm going to want to completely redo this entire setup we have going here that has ultimately been our Sieveing setup. Now, I'm sad to see it go, but at the moment, it's only been running off of golden upgrades, and I really want to make this be able to work with the highest tier upgrades. And at the moment, that's just not feasible, especially with the way that we're handling our ores and also handling our items. So yeah, before we jump into the fun that is going to be Draconic Evolution and getting started with that mod, we need to first tear this all down and get started for something way more epic. Now, I'm going to have 9 of these individual setups going in here, and all of these are sophisticated storage barrels because I still think I want to use the whole controller method, which seemed very clean for getting the items into a certain location. And all 9 of those items I have set up here, so I definitely want to make sure and prioritize the 3 main, which are going to be gravel, sand, and dust. And I can actually place this directly on my barrels because of Draconic Evolution by hitting P, and P actually allows us to place an item directly on a block as if it was a invisible item frame, which is a feature that's been around for a long time in Draconic and honestly kind of goes overlooked. Now, a lot of these other materials, for example, we have dirt, we have netherrack, and we have instone. Some of these things are going to be produced in a separate area, and we're probably going to utilize this space over here to be able to simply produce those little materials. For example, blackstone. I'm going to probably use an igneous extruder for this because now we have access to that super high tier part, which should allow us to produce the blackstone very fast. So now I kind of have these separated. These are going to be ones that are being produced with the igneous extruder. And then we have the ones down here, which these are going to be produced from essence from mystical agriculture. I think that's going to be the easiest way to set up the automation for these. So now with all of my thermal machines set up, I'm going to go ahead and place in the upgrades, and I want to see how fast this actually generates. So now you can see it does several at a time. We may have to expand on this in the future, I don't know. But for right now, this should surely be enough. It definitely generates quite a bit, 12 at a time. And now the way that I want to link these to these machines is by using entangled blocks. These things are just too nice to not use. So I will shift right click on the block selected and just simply place this here. And this should then hopper those items into the hammer and also into the sieve and then end up it should end up with a product down here. Of course, we won't see it working just yet because we do have to get this thing powered. Now, these others are just going to have exporters, and we are going to have crafting cards on the dirt, sand, and instone, which are all going to come from our phytogenic insulators that are producing our essences. As you may have guessed it, on these, well, they're just going to receive cobblestone. And then acceleration cards are really going to be the thing that makes this go faster. Now, another thing I definitely want to have set up is these meshes enchanted with efficiency, and we also want these to be enchanted with fortune. The easiest way to do that is with an enchanter. So I'm going to go ahead and slap down my enchanter over here, and this has a couple of rules that are required in order to get this to work. And those rules, for example, are that you have enough experience for the craft and you have the required amount and items for the craft. For example, in this case, we can look up a fortune book and we can see that for a level 3 fortune, it just requires 3 emeralds and of course 9 lapis and a book and quill and 27 levels in order to do this. So yes, this is going to take 27 levels for each book we create. And I'm going to need 9 of these. And same goes for the efficiency 5. Within this, I can use redstone and lapis with 33 levels and get myself efficiency 5, and which I'm going to use to combine with both the efficiency and the fortune, and we're going to max out these meshes. Now, I just did all of this work, and call me crazy that this even works, but when I went to enchant this, I just realized it does the entire stack. No way that works. Oh, okay, good. It looked like it was going to work, but it won't let me click. Whew, I was like, did I really just enchant all of that for nothing? It doesn't look like it. And after an anvil down, perfect. We now have all of our meshes all enchanted. And now each of these machines do need an upgrade and might as well put the max upgrade. This is going to cost 8 1,000 RF per tick per individual machine. And that is going to be ridiculous. And the processing time is every 20 ticks, but it's going to do an entire stack in that process. And I believe in my case, I'm going to need exactly 19 of them. And this will probably craft up way faster than I expected to. Oh, wow. Yeah, it's got all of these to go through to be able to make enough netherite ingots. Nothing like watching these mechanism machines fire up. And speaking of mechanism, I think I'm going to be using like the basic of basic 3x ore processing within mechanism to actually handle our ore processing. But before we do all of that, we still need to get our item logistics handling set up. So all of these items that we have here, we now need to find a way to get them into the places they need to go. And you guys in the comments have been asking me to dive into this mod for a while, and that is called a Super Factory Manager. I think this is going to be perfect for the job because we're going to essentially have a storage controller here that is going to be linked to all of these barrels. And that basically means that this storage right here has access to every single inventory slot. And the cool part about Super Factory Manager is it can pull all of the items from all of these inventories essentially every 20 ticks, which is about 1 second. And because of it having that limitation of 20 ticks as far as item transfer goes, it's actually relatively server friendly because you don't have to worry about stuff being pulled every single tick, which things, for example, like Laser IO and all of those mods can technically do. And so now with all of these inventories connected to this one controller, I want to technically use the Super Factory Manager to send items from this controller into this controller, which will then feed all of our items from our production on our sieving into this storage here. And then of course I'll have my applied energistics connected to the storage controller. But there is something else that I'm going to actually write when I start to make this program. I also want to exclude chunks from being sent into here. So that's something else I can do. And I can also take the items from here and send those chunks into another barrel, so that way we can have all of our ores that need to be processed sent and processed over here in its own little area. Oh, and by the way, our ore processing stack is going to look something like this. This should grant us 3 times guaranteed ore processing. And there are other ways that we could do this, and you can go up to a 5 times ore processing if you're processing from the raw ore itself. Of course, the best way to process ores has got to be using the Myriad crusher from Occultism, which will grant you and guarantee you 6 times ore processing. And it gets even higher because you could just process your ores by having them broken with a fortune pickaxe and then have the raw crush. But for this will be pretty nice. We just basically need to send the items into this slot up here, and that should be good. Now, the way I want to send the items into the slot is with a barrel. So this is going to be pretty interesting, right? So I can actually use, for example, an acacia barrel up here, and then I can use another controller, and we can use Super Factory Manager to send to this barrel that is then going to have a compacting upgrade in it. Now I'm going to have to also upgrade this to have a hopping upgrade. But if we go ahead and put this in here, we'll notice that this now should compact all of our ores. And the cool part about, for example, these machines, they'll only accept items that can actually go in the slot. So it should only be able to actually accept the processed ores, not the ore chunks. And just like how we have this linked, we can also link this to go up here. Now, of course, there's a ton of different ways that we could do this. We don't have to use these. We could have used entangle blocks, but it is pretty neat to just have a barrel just up here and it looks like it's working. And now with that basic to iron upgrade, we should get an extra slot, and this allows us to have that hopper upgrade, which is going to allow us to send those items directly into our setup here. And of course, this is going to need oxygen and power. That's the only thing. Oxygen is going to have to go into the purification chamber. Everything else is just standard, just dropping it down until you get to the bottom, and which we can just import or use Super Factory Manager to also send those ingredients into these drawers. So now when it comes to Super Factory Manager, I'm going to try my best and not be super confusing, but anything that touches the Super Factory Manager in any way, whether that is through an inventory cable or through the manager itself, you can actually interact with the inventories of these different blocks in multiple different ways. So for example, I have this connected technically to the storage controller, and then now I'm going to run up some of these cables, and these are now going to be touching the storage controller here. And so I can just run a straight line, and I can actually use this to send and receive items, fluids, gases, power, basically everything. So now I get the fun part of explaining exactly how this works, while also having a very limited understanding of how this works too. Now, I am very familiar with how coding works as a whole, and this whole setup honestly seems very simple and straightforward once you've seen it at least once. Now, the first thing we need to do is place in our disk that is going to store our program and also allow us to run this program. And what we need to do is we go into the edit tab and we can start typing stuff, but I recommend not doing this right away and instead just going to the view examples and taking a look at some of this code. Every time you click on this, it's going to bring you into the edit tab with a predefined code in there. And by default, I recommend a simple program. And this is going to prompt us with a name, and we can name it whatever we want. This is also going to name our disk. And then it talks about how our actual program kind of functions. And so I'm going to name my code Civ processing, just like this, because that's exactly what we're doing. Now, let's talk about this. Every 20 ticks do. This basically is going to be our call to our program that is going to happen every 20 ticks. So every 20 in-game ticks, it's going to do whatever we put inside of this little program here. And by default, it's basically saying input from A, which is a location we're going to define later, and output to B, which is a location we're going to define later. These A's and B's are up to us to name, and we can use whatever naming convention we want, but essentially we're going to say this, for example, is A, this is B, and this is C. Or in my case, this is going to be main, controller, and processing. And so in this case, I'm actually going to need two outputs because our one input is going to be coming from our main, and then we're going to have two outputs, and we can actually select and copy, and then we should be able to move things around. So just like you see here, and we can hit enter and tab over, and now we have two outputs. So you can copy and paste. You can do this in your own document or whatever you want. I'm going to call this controller. And then right here is going to be processing, since we're going to have multiple places for things to go. Just like that. Now, inside of our output, though, is where we're actually going to want to do some sneaky little filtering. Now, apparently, Super Factory Manager does not support tags or item tags inside of that filter list, which is kind of unfortunate because it would be really easy if we could just use the OR tag that is actually on these ORs here. Instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to set a filter that is going to essentially look for the word chunk inside of the name of these items. And that's how we're going to do our filtering. And that's actually kind of simple. So all we have to do is go in here and we can set up an exclusion on, for example, our controller. And we can also set up a whitelist by, for example, typing stone. So we can put stone, for example, here, and this would define a whitelist. And to do a blacklist, we need to type exclude. Or sorry, not exclude, it's accept. So we would just instead type accept, just like that. And then we can do this little thing right here by using, I think this is called an asterisk. We can use this and type in chunk, just like so, and then close it up with that. And so what that's going to do is that is going to look for this specific phrase or string inside of any of the items that we are going to be receiving from our main. And so down here for our whitelist, which is going to be sending to our processing, we're going to do the same thing. So chunk, if we spell it right, just like that. You want to make sure you get everything spelled right and make sure it is correct. Otherwise things will not work. But with this little program right here, technically this all should work. And like I said, the cool part about this is now ready to go. But if we notice right here, there is a little exclamation point. Whenever this exists, it means that we have an error. So there is somewhere in here an error that we need to actually fix. So what we can actually do is we can shift click to try and maybe fix whatever that error was. But in this case, it did not fix. So I'm gonna have to take a look at this. And in my case, whenever I clicked this and pasted it into a text document, it's telling me I have a couple of warnings. Those warnings is I do not have, for example, the controller, processing, or main identified yet. So how exactly do I do that? Well, we're going to be utilizing the label gun. So the label gun, we need to shift right click on the factory manager once we have things defined, and then we can open up and now we see main, controller, and processing. So let's first define main, and we can do that by clicking this and then right clicking, and now we have main set. I can then do my controller, and I'm going to set my controller and then my processing, which is over here. So with all of those set, we then just need to push that to our factory manager. So we just right click, and that is going to push the labels in here. And now we notice that the warnings are gone. And so what we should be able to do now is hop into here and test this. So I should be able to place an ore chunk inside of here, and it should be able to place it in. Now, to be able to double check, I'm going to unlock one of my drawers over here. So let's unlock this drawer, and it shouldn't send the ore chunk into our storage. Instead, it should send it into the barrel that is elsewhere. Notice it took that, and it should be in this barrel because, remember, we set up that exclusion or that blacklist, or the exception, I guess you could say. And so it instead did not decide to send it into this frame drawer. And so now we have pretty much everything set up to turn everything on. But I will say, I think I want to go in here and manually filter most things. And then I'm also going to, inside of these drawers, place a void filter in here. That way I can void a lot of the things. I really don't want to be receiving a lot of the like little chunks and bits that we just don't need in our system. So now with some things inside of a void filter, we won't have to worry about those little chunks and so on and so forth. Now back to this. Whenever we do send chunks to this, we want the advanced compactor to basically craft anything. We want it to craft the component. Otherwise, it would just set in here because it's not craftable back into the chunks. So if you set it to compact anything, now it will compact all of those ore chunks into individual ores that we can now send to this setup. And so now I kind of want to open the floodgates here. So I have all of these drawers now unlocked. And so this will be a very dramatic example of how this is all going to function. But as soon as I give this power, we should start to have items jump into here and start filling this up. And these all have upgrades, so they can store about 14,000 items. So once we know where everything goes and everything has its own slot, hopefully we can then use that to kind of organize this in a much better way. And as soon as I give this power, this is going to start rocking and rolling. And this is going to go incredibly fast. The reason I'm using the factory manager is because of just how many items at once every 20 ticks it can send. Just everything that's in here, it will instantaneously send out. You can see right there, which is tremendous. And it looks like right here, it is already building up its base feature or base amount of items, which is good. And it doesn't seem like it's duplicating anything, which, I mean, we shouldn't really see it duplicating. It should just fill what it has, and then we can start locking from here. So I'm gonna let this run for just a minute. Now, what is definitely gonna happen is I'm almost positive this is going to start really backing up. You can see all of the ores. And so we need to get this started and get all these machines upgraded. And by the way, anytime we want to stop this program, we can just pull the program out of here, and that will just simply pause the program from operating. By the way, this machine up here needs oxygen. So I'm just going to make sure that the auto output is set up for oxygen, and that is going to automatically start processing. I do, however, need to go into each of these setups here. I need to make sure that the outputs are set up appropriately. So just like this, we need the auto output and so on and so forth. On the bottom of this whole setup, I'm going to use an interface to make sure it can handle the vast amount of items we're probably going to have flooding through here. And then I will just simply connect this in directly into our system. When upgrading these machines, definitely got to get that gas burning upgrade inside of here. And then of course our speed and energy in all of these, because we've got to see how many of these setups we're going to need if we're going to need more than just one. So I also have all of my tier installers. And so we should be able to upgrade all of these machines just like that. Oh man, I love these tier installers because they're so fantastic. So all like that. And now it should allow multiple ore in, as you can see right here. And all of these should start processing up. But notice there's only so many slots and there's only so many ore. So we're going to have to keep an eye on that. And also our oxygen output. We may need to set up another one of these electrolytic separators. Now, I think instead of using an ultimate smelting factory, instead I'm going to use an all-the-modium furnace. And this should be fast enough, especially with a factory upgrade in here and with the speed. That is going to be way faster than anything that the mechanism can do. So yeah, I think at the end of the day, I might just switch this to just enriching and having a bunch of enriching factories that are being sent regular ore, because this whole process here is just not going to be able to keep up. It is going to be way too slow. So now the cool part about this whole setup is I've got it set up so that way I can just add more inventories. So like if we needed to process more, it just needs to be connected to this. So I can just simply right click here, and now all of these inventories are now connected to what is our processing setup or output. And now I just got to upgrade the rest of the machines, and this should be almost ready to go. So now to give it a shot, I've just got to put the program back in here, and this should now be sending, I believe. And yeah, it has now started sending here and is doing all the compacting in this first drawer. If this drawer fills up, it should start to fill into these other drawers that are now linked. So now just to sort of cover all of my bases, I think having another one over here where it's basically just going to send the raw ore if these overfill, because by the way, I believe the way that the controller works is whatever is linked to first in that order is going to be the sort of priority. So however we linked these together determines that. So if I go ahead and now add this as the next one on this list, it will send to this once these other ones start to, for example, have the buffer overfilled. And I just want it to be smelted as fast as possible. And then I'm just going to send it with an interface, and this should cover our final section here, and that'll actually use up our last channel. And what I'm also doing is using a transmutation import bus on our controller, and I have my actual storage bus on here, so we can now access all of these items. But essentially, I'm pulling out all the things that have EMC that we're getting from Sieveing. For example, these crystals from Sieveing have EMC, so it also doubles as an EMC farm, technically. And in these barrels, I've placed in 2 netherite upgrades, and that means each of these slots now hold like 12 million items. And I tell you what, it would be really difficult for any other mod to keep up with the vast amount of items that we're actually generating from just this small amount of civs. And that's one of the main reasons why I decided to go with the Super Factory Manager for this. So now one of the big gains that we actually got from setting this up, which I mentioned at the beginning of the episode was going to help us get into Draconic Evolution, was the fact that we get a bunch of Draconium dust. Now, ultimately, we want to make seeds for the Draconium. That is something that we're definitely going to do, and it's going to take some time for us to actually build up the Awakened Essence. And this is going to be one of the main ways that we actually get into the full Draconic mod. And it requires quite a bit of Awakened Draconium as we move into, for example, the infinite storage and all kinds of stuff for our wireless. But to be able to actually make Awakened, you do need to make blocks of it. And that requires us to get into the fusion crafting stuff from Draconic Evolution. So I think the best way to sort of finish off today's episode is to actually finally fight the dragon. But I do want to make myself a Qatar before we do this. This is an insanely overpowered weapon, by the way, that allows us to kill a bunch of mobs in a huge radius instantly, including the Wither. However, I don't believe it works directly on the dragon, but it does have a significant amount of base damage that it deals. Overall, this has got to be one of the best swords in the entire pack. And it's also a way of stripping logs. It can strip logs. Just be very careful. Do not right click on pre-existing stripped logs. Otherwise, in a huge area, all of your stripped logs will just be gone. Now, to be able to use that slay feature, it is under the extra features button. So you do need to make sure you set your keybind. Whatever it is for the extra function is going to be what actually does the whole killing. And you can also change the modes. For example, right now it's set to slay hostiles. By the way, V charges it. So you can see right there, now it is fully charged and it will deal 28 attack damage, and it's not even enchanted. So I think with all of our gear that we have now, we can probably head back to the end and actually take on the dragon a couple of times. And you can see I am still in my main gear. I just have some cosmetic gear on as of right now. And I wonder, how quickly can we actually take out said dragon? I mean, that is if we can catch up. We're not super fast flying in the air. I will go ahead and take the data model. In that way, whenever we do take him out, I will learn from him. But notice, by the way, if I use that extra function down here, all of these Endermen just get wrecked. And I wonder, can I do a lot of damage? It doesn't do a whole lot, so I probably need to go through here and actually take these out. And you can see I can just punch them standing by them. If I was in red matter gear, I wouldn't take any damage at all. And I was absolutely wrong. If you do use that extra function, it insta-kills the Ender Dragon. That is actually kind of wild. If you get right up next to the Ender Dragon and you do that extra feature, yes, it does delete the dragon. I was actually not expecting that. And so now we have one more remaining, but we ended up getting dragon hearts, and this is an important part of the Draconic Evolution, and we are going to need a couple of them, well, really probably just one, in order to actually make the base seeds, because we're going to need this one to make the actual blocks of this material. Now, I definitely want to try and get my egg wherever the egg may have gone. There we go. That way we can get our actual egg. Just place my torch down and voila. Perfect. Next generation, we now have our egg. And I do want to resummon the dragon, and I just want to show you how insanely fast now this is going to be to actually take the dragon out. With the Qatar, it's absurd. It should not be this easy. All of these things have to regenerate, but as soon as it's done, the dragon will be insta-killed. And so now with the dragon up here, spawned in, all I have to do is get close to them and use my extra key. Oh man. It's just not fair. It's really not. The Qatar is so overpowered. It's insanely overpowered. And yeah, so we can just stand here and collect all of our resources. What a fun little thing. And if these guys are bothering you, you can just insta-slay them. I'm assuming this also works with Apotheosis bosses. And this process also, for some reason, ended up spawning 2 more eggs. Because here's another egg. Yeah, they're just going all over the place. That's interesting. Huh. So now with the dragon data model ready to go, we now have access to anything the dragon drops, including dragon's breath and dragon eggs and any real thing we might want. I know we can do it from Zycraft as well, but this honestly will produce them indefinitely and automatically go right into our system. And so now with that, I hope you guys did enjoy today's episode. I'm looking forward to getting into some more Draconic Evolution and hopefully getting that sphere up as soon as possible. But until next episode, be sure to click that subscribe button if you haven't already and give this video a huge thumbs up. Hopefully you'll learn something new, whether it was from Super Factory Manager or learning how to sort items logistically and think in a different way. And guys, I think it's now time to thank the amazing supporter of today's episode. And that amazing thanks is going to go out to Dira. Thank you so much, by the way, for your amazing support by choosing to support me over on the Discord, by becoming a Discord premium member and supporting in one of the best ways possible. I thank you so very much, and I thank all of you guys for watching. I look forward to seeing you in the next one, and of course, as always, thanks for watching. Bye!